Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Hate Culture. Back on today's episode is Dr. Bergeron. You'll remember him from a previous episode. He is the medical doctor who we spoke about on the death of Jesus, the fact that Jesus died on the cross, and the evidence, therefore, and what could be the best explanation for as to how he died. Today, we're going to speak on the hallucination hypothesis. Dr. Bergeron, welcome.
Good to be with you.
I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
Looking forward to today.
I'm glad to be in South Africa again.
You mean virtually?
Virtually.
Yeah, no, we're looking forward to when you're here back physically as well.
Yes, I like that. One fine day.
We would like that as well. So, for the audience, just to set the scene, there's this scene in the movie A Case for Christ where Dr. Lee Strobel, don't know if he's a doctor, but Lee Strobel, the reporter, is speaking to a psychiatrist and he's trying to disprove Christianity. And he asks what could it have been a mass hallucination? And this psychiatrist is agnostic, and being agnostic, she tells him that no, that would have been impossible. So for those who've watched the movie, we're gonna touch on that specific hypothesis. Dr. Bergeron, would you lay that hypothesis out for us as to what the hallucination hypothesis entails?
Well, I'm at a disadvantage. I didn't see the movie. Is that where J. Warner Wallace is interviewing? I don't know. I didn't see the movie, but I know Mr. Wallace.
Yeah. So basically, it's Lee Strobel, the reporter, atheist reporter who investigated the Case for Christ, but as he was trying to disprove it, he was speaking to an agnostic psychiatrist in the movie, and he asked her at one stage, just before he walked out, could it have been a mass hallucination? For a lot of disciples thought they saw Jesus' body after his death, and the agnostic psychiatrist then told him, no, that would have been impossible. So,
I agree. Well, we should back up. Let's back.
Okay, cool.
We back up. What are hallucinations? They are experiences in one or more of the five senses that are real to the individual, but there's no external referent. There's no external stimulus.
Okay.
Okay. So, what kind of things cause that? Well, it could be a biochemical derangement. Hallucinogenic drugs, could be something metabolic, like alcoholics will go into delirium tremens, and they may see elephants walking in the room or snakes crawling in the bed, that sort of thing. Certain types of seizures, lateral temporal lobe seizures, can cause visual sorts of experiences, or certain tumors could cause that, and by extension, epileptic form activity, I think, in the lateral temporal lobe. So when you say someone is hallucinating, you have to say why they're hallucinating, because this is the thing that's, painfully absent among the writings of critical scholars that seek to propose a hallucination hypothesis. So how is it that so many people could experience a hallucination with the understanding that it requires some sort of significant illness, either a biochemical one, a neuroanatomical one, or a psychodynamic one, which we would refer to as psychiatric illness, where the illness intrudes into the conscious mind in the form of hallucinations. So could all the disciples have experienced that kind of illness, or some hodgepodge of those types of illnesses simultaneously? What's the likelihood of that? I'm not a mathematician. I'm not a math genius by any level, although I used to enjoy mathematics when I was young. If you stop and think, if there were 120 faithful believers on the day of Pentecost, but 12 of them had an identical episode at once, what would be the probability of that? And somebody watching is probably a mathematical genius and can figure it out, or can figure out the kind of statistical analysis. To my rudimentary kind of freshman level thinking, I came up with a number of 1.88 in a trillion, 12 identical events simultaneously in a group of 120 individuals. So, I mean, that's not hard evidence, but it kind of points to, could it have happened that way? Can we explain away the experiences of the disciples who, by their description, experienced something that was for them very, very real, to the point that they would accept severe persecution and loss of life, loss of property, and without any motivation other than the experience that they believed that they encountered Jesus bodily alive again after his crucifixion. Your initial question was about mass. I think you said hallucination. Mass hysteria is an old Freudian term. In more modern parlance, we would call it group sociogenic phenomena. And it is true that groups of people can experience or have experiences that we could say are psychologically mediated and could be hallucinatory in some sense. So groups of people can have such experiences or have some kind of experience, but there's a different kind of group dynamic where there is a sense of expectation, a sense of excitement when that is pervasive in the group. And that is in stark contrast to what the disciples were doing, because remember now that John and Mary, the mother of Jesus, were standing next to the cross, but the Bible says that everyone that knew him saw. From afar off, they were at a distance, but they all watched it. And so, they were in hiding, right? The door was barred. Jesus came through the wall or the door somehow, but it was locked. Why? They thought they would be next, right? They were afraid. So the group dynamic necessary to cause a group sociogenic phenomena or mass hysteria in older parlance just simply wasn't present. And that's evidenced by, they didn't go to the tomb on Easter Sunday morning, right? They weren't there holding a candle and singing a song. The ladies went because it was their task to complete the embalming process. And that's Jewish funerary customs are in the Second Temple period are well understood and well documented. I would refer interested readers to the book entitled The Jewish Funerary Customs in the Second Temple Period by Rachel Hatchley, I think. She's at the University of Haifa. It's an academic tome, but it describes in great detail the burial customs. And so the body would be washed. The body would be wrapped in a shroud. It would be anointed with perfumes, aromatic plants, that sort of thing. Then they would be sprinkled over the body, wrapped in the shroud. Then the body would be placed in a wooden box. And then when the soft tissue components of decay were no longer present, the bones would be collected and placed in an ossuary. Sorry to be so graphic about it, but that was their burial custom. And so the sun was going down. They had to get him down and get him in the tomb as quickly as possible. So the ladies were going back to, finish the usual burial preparations. So nobody was expecting that, right? According to the biblical account, Mary Magdalene said that, they've taken away his body, and I don't know where they've laid it. She thought that Jesus was the gardener, and just tell me where he is. I'll take the body back. So nobody was expecting that. Nobody was expecting a near-term resurrection, and they were in fear and they were in hiding. So the group dynamic was not present to create an atmosphere for a group sociogenic phenomena. The other thing is that no two separate individuals experience precisely the same hallucination. And that's kind of a no-brainer. That's kind of an obvious thing, right? Because if the hallucination is occurring specifically in the milieu of the individual's brain, how could two separate people experience precisely the same thing? So in the context of a group excitement or something, like, people may talk to each other and think that they've kind of have some kind of excitement spread among the group and believe they saw something similar. But here, again, the group dynamic is very different. But in the scriptures, you have multiple cases where people see Jesus together. They're group encounters. Jesus appears to the disciples when Thomas isn't present. You know, we call him Doubting Thomas. I don't think I would have done any better. You know, if you saw what happened, you'd probably say the same thing. So he appeared to the disciples. Thomas wasn't there. Later, when Thomas was there, you know, he prepared food for some of the disciples after they were fishing. And then in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the first creed of the church is he spoke to 500 people at once. So if he's preaching a sermon, if it was hallucination, no two people would know what the sermon was about. They wouldn't tell you the sermon title. Do you know what the sermon title was?
No, and I actually don't.
I'll tell you. In Acts chapter 1, it says that he preached about the kingdom of God. His sermon would have been about the kingdom of God. So it behooves all Christians to study the kingdom of God, and it's kind of on my list of things to do to get a better understanding. But if that's what he was preaching about, it must have been really important to him, and that would have been the content of his sermons to his disciples, who then went and launched the church throughout the Roman Empire, to the point that within a generation, by 69 AD, there were enough Christians through the Roman Empire that Nero, the emperor, launched the first of 10 mass persecution campaigns. So what motivates people to do that? It had to be something that was, for them at least, very real. How do you discount that? So we may have mentioned before, if you look at, how do you explain that? If you want to be academically honest, historians agree, Christian or not, that Jesus was a historical figure.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's clear evidence of Jesus outside the Bible. Tacitus, I think, is a very good example of a Roman historian who wrote about Jesus, who had no affection for Christianity, thought that it was something evil in the empire. But he wrote about Jesus being crucified by Pontius Pilate. So there you have, secular history in the period describing what we know about Jesus. So it's kind of almost like you don't need the Gospels to know what happened to Jesus, right? And the rise of Christianity. So Jesus was a real person. So if you look at the crucifixion, you say, well, so if you want to, as Orthodox Christians, we believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ, according to the scriptures, right? So if you want to be academically honest and kind of look for an alternate explanation, you don't want to believe that. And I would say most of the world doesn't believe that, maybe doesn't know about Christianity, would probably take the default position that it never happened, or just can't accept the possibility of anything supernatural occurring, or that God even exists. So if you want to gravitate toward that kind of worldview or thought process, how do you explain it away? Some people say, well, okay, well, Jesus didn't really die.
Hmm.
And that's what people call the swoon theory, right? In various iterations of that, but it's some sort of thing that Jesus didn't die. And we talked about that last time, that the Roman military discipline was so austere that if you fell asleep when you were on watch, you would be beaten to death, right? If you were on an execution team and you allowed a capital criminal to escape, you were going to die yourself. And we see that alluded to in Acts chapter 16 with the Philippian jailer who's going to fall on his sword when he thought Paul and Silas had escaped. And so there is one literary reference to someone surviving crucifixion. That was one of the friends of Joseph Flavius Josephus, who was a defector, became a Roman citizen, and he was an eyewitness to the siege of Jerusalem. He saw 3 of his friends being crucified. He got a stay of execution. They were all 3 taken down, but 2 died anyway, because the body can only accept a certain level of insult before it's an irreversible pathway to death. But one of them did survive, and that's the only literary reference to anyone ever surviving a crucifixion. You simply would not survive. And again, if we look at the biblical narrative, that they thrust a spear into Jesus' side before the body was released, and the reason for that was that they were not going to allow even the possibility that he survived, because it would mean their death. Okay, so we can take the swoon theory off the table, and if people would seek to take the biblical narrative off the table, and we take the swoon theory off the table, what do we have left? It's some kind of disciple error. Well, what would it be? You know, they went to the wrong tomb, and they found it empty, and they somehow mistakenly believed that Jesus had resurrected. Nobody goes to an empty tomb and thinks the body resurrected. Why would they think that? They weren't expecting his resurrection. They were in hiding. They had, you know, in some Jewish tradition, they would believe in a resurrection at the end of time, but a near-term resurrection was completely off their radar screen. They didn't understand it, even though he had tried to tell them about it. But how would an empty tomb make you think that, say, you watched a grisly execution, you watched a spear thrust into his side, you watched him being beaten to a pulp before, you know, it just wouldn't be part of your thinking to go to an empty tomb and to the wrong tomb and think, well, he must have resurrected. It just wouldn't. The logical problems with that are enormous. And by the way, you know, the Pharisees had set temple guards by the tomb, right? Because they were afraid someone would come and steal the body and perpetrate some kind of hoax or whatever. So how do you miss a tomb when there's a company of soldiers there? You know, it would be hard to miss that, right? It was a new stone-cut tomb, and the tombs were, if again, you can look into the funerary customs if you're interested, but they would open into a small room that was maybe not quite big enough to stand up in, and then there would be inlets in the wall of the tomb where the interred would be placed, and the tombs would be meant for generations. It would be a family, multi-generational tomb. So this one's new, so it really speaks of someone of wealth. And and they all saw where it was placed. So the problems with going to the wrong tomb or finding an empty tomb, which is basically the same thing, is really difficult. You know, the logic falls fairly quickly, and people recognize that it's kind of doesn't make sense. So skeptical scholars have gravitated over towards psychological phenomena. They must have been hallucinating. And we talked about why hallucinations occur. And the probability is just really against those kinds of illnesses, psychiatric, metabolic, or anatomical sorts of derangements of the central nervous system occurring simultaneously in a group like that, that kind of doesn't really make much sense. Group sociogenic phenomena, again, doesn't make sense simply because of the group dynamic wasn't present to cultivate an experience like that. And with any sort of hallucination hypothesis, they offer no explanation for the kind of group experiences. Some people have proposed, well, they were grieving. They were grieving, and they had, they somehow, out of their grief and mourning, they had visions of Jesus. Well, actually, people that grieve do have experiences that you could call them hallucinatory, but that hallucination really speaks to an underlying pathology or disease condition, whereas the sorts of hallucinatory phenomena that occur in grieving are part of a grief experience. And the most common one is a sense of closeness to the departed person. And it's most commonly seen with spouses, sometimes with children. When my grandfather died, my grandmother said once in a while that she could hear him calling her name. And it usually occurs kind of at the interface of sleeping and waking, or what we would call hypnagogic phenomena. So those things occur. And in complex grief, where people have severe and prolonged grief experiences, sometimes they may even have a visual experience of some sort. The thing about those types of experiences are that if the individual tries to interact with the visual experience or the voice, that kind of dissipates. They can go on for a long period of time.
It's not. Sorry, so it's not like eating fish with him or physically touching him.
Exactly, they dissipate. They're unlike the physical experiences, and they're private experiences. People don't talk about it. It's a very private sort of thing. It almost always is with a spouse. It never creates a life change. It never makes the spouse believe that the departed one had resurrected. And they're not interactive. So they really don't fit the paradigm of encountering a resurrected person. And that would, it would be hard to miss. Blaise Pascal said. So if you met somebody that resurrected from the dead, it would be hard to mistake that, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
And when he was gone, what was going to sustain them except the reality of the experience? To the point again that they would all. John lived to an old life traditionally, but the other disciples died traumatic deaths. It would have to be a real experience to have someone carry it to that level and accept death, persecution, assassination attempts, just a horrible life. It would have to be something that was so real to them that they would accept all of that rather than to say it didn't happen.
Yes. Yeah, that makes that. So to sum up what you said is, even if we disregard what Scripture said, just based upon how the Christian church started afterwards, and the testimonies of the disciples, and the fact that they didn't recant those testimonies even to the point of death, showed that it was definitely real experiences to them. And then you also pointed out throughout that the probability is really, really low for it to have been a hallucination.
Uh, yes, and mathematic people can do statistical analysis on that. Read one the other day, um, where the probability, and and I know that because they referenced the article I did with Dr. Habermas, and looking at the different occurrences and found the probability uh, to account for them by hallucination to be zero, which to a mathematician means it's not possible.
Yes.
so so uh, so yeah, I mean, just looking at that from a probability standpoint, but also in terms of the logic, uh, the
Mm.
medical logic to try to propose such an explanation is outside the bounds of medical understanding. And these kind of explanations are proposed by skeptical theological scholars, um, and they don't occur in peer-reviewed literature. They occur in books and debates, interviews, that sort of thing. Um, what you don't have is a medical analysis of these sorts of propositions. And as I was looking and reading through these things, everything I could find about it, and reading what they had said, it was very clear to me that they had never seen anyone in these conditions. And I had, at various points in career and education. It was clear to me that they had no idea what they were talking about.
Mm.
But, that being said, I mean, it really, if you look at the merit of it in terms of the medical explanation, because really, you look at the explanations, you can say, well, okay, I'm not going to believe the biblical narrative. The swoon theory doesn't make sense. They didn't go to the wrong tomb or find an empty tomb. That's nonsense. Okay, you want to say they're hallucinating, but wait, you've proposed a medical explanation.
And on that,
and you don't have the background. Yeah.
Yes. So on that, you've mentioned your article of Dr. Habermas, and you've mentioned that this type of hypothesis has not been peer reviewed or medically analyzed. So just before the show, when we were speaking off air, you mentioned that, as far as you know, the article that you guys wrote was the first time that this hypothesis was under peer review, the scrutiny of peer review. Would
Yeah.
you divulge a bit into that, as to how it was scrutinized and how you guys, is it the same as what we've already discussed in the episode so far, or how did, when you peer reviewed it, would you go through that process of what that entails?
Well, I had written a peer-reviewed article in the Journal of Forensic and Legal Medicine on Jesus' cause of death, and I would start to give talks to academic groups and things. And then it kind of occurred to me, like, well, I can't really leave Jesus dead, can I? I have to look at, does medicine have anything to say about the resurrection of Jesus? And as I said a minute ago, you have a volume of literature by skeptical scholars that will make alternate propositions of various sorts. But many of them hazard into a medical explanation. And I didn't find any, and I looked for a long time. I couldn't find anyone that had kind of examined the logical merit of those from a medical perspective. And so I did that and looked at everything I could find. And a lot of it I just talked to you about in summation. How I got to Dr. Habermas was because I wanted to publish it in peer review, and I would submit it to theological journals, and they don't, it's just way out in left field for them. It's like, I knew it wasn't something that I could submit to a medical journal, and medical journals really don't want to deal with any kind of religious anything, and there's a lot of resistance to that. My journal on Jesus, the article on Jesus' cause of death was rejected 6 times before it was accepted to the Journal of Forensic and Legal Medicine, and that's not all the journal's faults. It's partly me trying to find my way to find the appropriate venue to have it, and that was a good fit for that article. But the article that I wrote with Dr. Habermas, and I'm not sure how much, maybe 60-70% of that I wrote, and then, but I wasn't getting any traction interacting with theological journals, which I thought is where it should be. So I went to a conference to meet Dr. Habermas, and what I asked him was, do you have a graduate student that would help get this ready for publication in a theological journal? Because I had one journal, the Irish Theological Quarterly, which I understand to be a prestigious Catholic journal. I don't know. But it was the Irish Theological Quarterly that expressed an interest, but they said, well, you're not interacting with theological literature. It's like, okay, well, I'm kind of dead in the water there. I could try to do that, but I wouldn't be able to do it very well, and the learning curve would be steep, and I kind of didn't know what to do next. So I was seeking some assistance, and then he said that he wanted to do that and participate with that. So we worked on that for, I don't know how long, maybe a year off and on, before the final publication. So that is the first treatment of that topic. In other words, a medical critique, a medical analysis of hallucination hypotheses.
Is that the exact title to the article?
Oh, the exact. Oh gosh.
Just if somebody wants to go look it up.
I can't remember the exact title.
It's okay. I'll see if I can find it and maybe.
Yeah, it's a hallucination hypothesis, a medical analysis of the biblical narrative of Easter, something like that.
Okay.
I could find it and send it to you. It's in the Irish Theological Quarterly. If you Google my name and go to the Irish Theological Quarterly, or Dr. Habermas' name, you can go to you go to my website, Medical Doctor Examines Jesus. There's links to the publications. And if you're really interested and you email me through my website, I'll send it to you.
There you go, guys.
I'll send you both articles.
There you go, guys.
Any questions you have, if as far as I can. But yeah, that's the first time that anybody said, "Hey, wait a minute, this doesn't make medical sense." Well, I guess, I mean, it's kind of a parallel universe. They're on one side and the doctors are on the other side, and doctors are largely not going to be interested in this kind of discussion anyway. Except for those of us that have a commitment to our faith. But we kind of live in a scientific world, and we're involved in treating people, and we're this is kind of don't have time for this kind of stuff. Unless it means something to you personally that you want to engage and speak to it. But I guess I was surprised when I started reading what skeptical scholars had written, because I knew that people had proposed that the disciples were hallucinating. I didn't realize how much it didn't make sense until I started reading it and thinking and understanding these people had never seen anyone in these conditions, understand the implications of it and what it would take to have someone that sick. And if you take 12 people that are that sick, and they orchestrate the rapid expansion of Christianity in the Roman Empire, how do you explain that? How do you explain that?
Exactly. So, do you know what the response was like towards you guys' journal or the article?
I don't know. Nobody bothers me. I get occasional questions, people, but I don't know. I don't get any pushback or blowback, you know, contesting what I've written. I have not had that.
And it hasn't created some traction amongst other doctors or so forth that also of the faith.
I I wrote my book with the two journal articles, that one, the hallucination hypothesis, and the medical journal article, as the basis for the book, and that was to present the information to a wider readership. Because things get in academic journals and nobody ever sees it.
Yes.
And so I tried to make it so that it's understandable. And really the target audience for my book was the college age or college graduate person, because as you probably know, in South Africa is probably the same as the United States, where there's a large apostasy when children go to
Yes.
college. Children that are raised in church, that have a kind of a decent but biblical understanding, go to college and abandon their faith 60 to 80%, depending on the survey, usually in their freshman year. And I thought, so I wanted to not give necessarily a theological dissertation, although there's theology in the book, but to say, how can you explain away Jesus Christ so easily? And I understand that as a freshman in a college setting, and you need to get your grade to go on to your aspiration, and you're probably reluctant to get in a public dispute with an angry atheist professor. But you know, by the same token, the intent of the book was that you could pick it up and understand what happened to Jesus. So there's historical content. There's, the murder conspiracy, what was happening, what set the stage, who were the political players, what was Roman crucifixion like, what was happening physiologically to Jesus, and then the discussion of the resurrection. The other thing is, as a physician, I've been kind of through lots of levels of education and professional life, and you'd be surprised that I've known people that are so smart, just really intelligent people, can't make a sentence about Jesus Christ. Don't know anything about him. Can't make a sentence about him. And so that shouldn't be the case either. And even though, understandably, most of the world is not Christian, and I don't, I hope people read the book and understand a logical basis for faith in Christ. But I understand a lot of people won't. But at least you can have an idea what happened and try to present the facts that way. So that was my target audience, the college age group, and hopefully my colleagues that maybe are reluctant to adopt a faith to kind of think about it and give it some extra thought, and understand that there's logical merit. At least we can't explain away Jesus Christ as easily as some would seek to do.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And prayerfully, my prayer is that it would get a lot more traction, and to get not only people from the medical field, but to even those scholars who kind of outside of the expertise, who kind of appeal to this hypothesis, that they would see the error in their ways in some sense.
Well, I hope so, and I hope, and again, that was part of the ambition to publish the book, was that it would go to a wider readership, because I don't follow skeptical theological literature. You might do that, but I presume that it's a frequent discussion point that the disciples were hallucinating or something like that. It
is, and even in the general public, if you get your I almost want to say layman skeptic, there's a couple of go-to theories that they would go to
Mhm.
with but the hallucination hypothesis is definitely one of them that is easily appealed to.
Yeah, because the others don't make sense. But if you stop and do a little bit of homework, and I'm helping you with that. I've done the homework for you. It's in the book. I think it's readable to a college level person. That you can understand that doesn't make sense either. So when you start to stratify, I talk in the book about, and physicians will use what's called a differential diagnosis. It's a logical method where if you go to the physician and you describe your symptoms, the physician will start to make a list of what could cause that. And then through additional questioning, examination, special testing, so forth, you start to stratify the list and adjust the list in terms of logical merit. And then the number one reason for treatment failure is wrong diagnosis, right?
Wow.
So,
Yeah, so that makes sense.
so you really want to do diligence to your process, but the skilled physician, through a process of time and hopefully not very long, within a day or two, will come to the correct diagnosis and be able to um, give a proper treatment and make people feel better, and if we're lucky, cure people, but at least keep bad things from happening to people and make them feel better. So when you stratify the kinds of alternate explanations to the biblical narrative, like Jesus swooned and didn't die, or that the disciples went to a wrong tomb, they perpetrated a hoax. Why would they do that when it would get him killed? It doesn't make any sense. People understand it doesn't make sense. So they gravitate to something they may not know much about. Oh, well, maybe they're hallucinating. We know people, that happens to people. Maybe this is it. And you stop and don't do the extra homework to understand whether that's a logical thing or not, because it's really not. And so then you start to stratify and say, well, if you look at the differential diagnosis, what comes to the top is really the biblical narrative. And everything else kind of pales by comparison. And so I think, that's the logical point. There's a compelling reason to believe the biblical narrative.
It is the best explanation.
Yes, I think so.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Dr. Bergeron, thank you very much. Is there anything else that you think is on this topic specifically that is important for the audience to take note of?
Well, I don't know what kind of audience you have. Academic people. The one thing I didn't talk about, the psychologist Carl Jung thought that the Apostle Paul experienced what's called a conversion disorder. And conversion disorder has nothing to do with religious conversion. It's a kind of a Freudian psychoanalytic term that where psychological pain is converted into suspension of neurologic function. And so, and I've seen this, it does occur. It's an unfortunate thing to witness. Probably a textbook example is if a mother finds a child drowned in a swimming pool, they go blind. They can't deal with the psychological trauma that they've experienced. So that happens. Paul on the road to Damascus encountered Jesus and went blind transiently. And so Dr. Jung, who was brilliant and well known in psychological literature, believed that he had experienced a conversion disorder that's causing him to go blind transiently. He proposed that Paul had secretly been a Christian, even though he's out trying to persecute and see other Christians being killed, such as Stephen. But he was secretly and privately a Christian, and then he had this conversion experience. The problem with that explanation is that it's an antiquated concept of conversion disorder. In other words, a conversion disorder does occur, and I've seen people that have experienced that, but it doesn't also include a hallucination. You follow me?
Yes, I do.
A person could have a psychological trauma and go blind transiently. Although that description isn't exactly what we see in Acts chapter 8 or 9, whatever it is. But to have that experience and also have a hallucination would require a dual diagnosis, two separate psychiatric diagnoses to occurring simultaneously or in that individual at the same time. So there again, then we start to make the explanation more complex. The other thing is that with conversion disorders, people will very often, they will get over it and kind of go on with their life and resume their usual activity. In Paul's case, he had a 180-degree turn that was lifelong, that he he was a rising star in the Jewish religious community. He persecuted Christians. He was on the road persecuting Christians. He was vigorously doing that. Held their coats while they were stoning Stephen, right? But he had a lifelong 180-degree change to become the most prolific voice for Christianity in the Gentile world of his day. So that's really inconsistent with Paul having experienced a conversion disorder. So I think I understand how Dr. Young might think that. But I would also say I think there's logical problems with that. It would require a dual diagnosis, and it would require lifelong change in behavior, which is not characteristic of people that experience conversion disorder. So I don't think that was the case. So anyway, if somebody said, okay, but I still think that's what happened to Paul. Okay, but that doesn't erase the biblical narrative. It doesn't erase everybody else. If Paul was a one out, okay, you can have that argument, but it doesn't erase the gospel narrative and the rise of Christianity and the behavior of the other disciples who did walk with Jesus both before and after the crucifixion by their description. You remember in it's Luke chapter 24, the Luke rendition of the Great Commission. It says, I think it's 24. It says, you've read the law and you've read the prophets and you've seen me. So, and go tell people what you've seen, right? So we shouldn't be so naive or glibly say that Jesus did miracles to prove he was the Messiah. His proof that he was the Messiah was that he fulfilled the biblical narrative, the biblical prophecy about the Messiah. That's what he told them to say. You've read the law, you've read the prophets, you've seen me, you're eyewitnesses. Go and tell people what you've seen. And so that's what gave rise to Christianity in the first century.
And that's exactly what we see Paul, Peter, and Stephen do in the book of Acts.
Yes. Yeah. And is it Acts chapter 10? I think it's Acts chapter 10 where Peter's speaking to Cornelius. He said, we've seen him, right? We've seen him and declare this to you. So it's all about, Jesus was very, he had expertise in organizational leadership, right? He selected people and trained them, and people that carried out their mission successfully, except for Judas. But 11 out of 12 is pretty good.
Very good.
Plus, he was foretold, so it was unfortunate that he lived that life. But yeah, so the eyewitness part of that, you really can't get away from that. That it was real to them, and psychological explanations fail, and they specifically offered no explanation for group encounters.
Thank you for that. I think there was a nice gold nugget there at the end. Thank you for adding that about Carl Jung as well, which is interesting because one of the upcoming episodes I've lined up to speak about somebody on Carl Jung and his ideas, and so there's an upcoming episode where Carl Jung is going to be the topic of the episode. So interesting that you kind of set that up for me beautifully.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about him. I think he postulated these ideas of complexes and ego complex and all that sort of thing. I think he identified as a Christian. I think he had a near-death experience. And perhaps to his mind, his explanation of Paul made perfect sense. And, I don't fault him for that, but I do think there are logical problems with it. And again, if you want to have that argument and think you've won it and make that a bone to fight over, go ahead and keep it. But it doesn't explain away everything else.
No, it doesn't.
So,
thank you very much. I appreciate that a lot, and I found that really interesting. I did.
Okay. All right. Do you have any more questions?
No, from my side, I think I don't have any more questions. I think you've laid everything out beautifully. If I ask anything, we're just going to rehash and repeat what has already been said.
Yeah.
I think the answer is quite clear, and I'm going to put the Amazon link to your book in the description because I think people should go and read that. Myself, going to try and do that as well.
If you can put a link to my website,
Yes.
Medical Doctor Examines Jesus, if people will email me, I'll send them a copy of the articles, and I try to be careful about answering questions also. People have that.
100%. I'll link that in the show description. But thank you very much for talking to me again. I've enjoyed it a lot. I've learned a lot, and I think it was definitely really a breath of fresh air because most of the people I speak to are from the theological tradition. So it was a quite. I've enjoyed the experience of speaking to you coming from a medical perspective. Thank you for that.
It's my pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you. And
All
to
right.
those I just wanted to say to those watching and listening, this is A Culture. Until next time, goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.